Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 4 of Narco-Saints. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So immediately picking up where the last episode left off, I wasn't really sure how that whole, because I knew the whole plan was like, okay, like no, like things don't have to turn into an actual gunfight, and Troy was trying to like push things in a direction where they wouldn't, because, you know, him and David were just being like, hey, you should take the money and the drugs. The fact is that David was kind of okay with it. Like, Byun and Lee were the ones who had the biggest reservations, Lee in particular, but that's why I kind of feel like David, I'm still not, it seems like it is David even more so, because later on, they have his phone tapped. So either they just happen to have his phone tapped, or like, because he has to be the inside guy. Like, there's just too much correlating to make it seem like he is. But especially later on when Ingu was kind of throwing it David's way, maybe they kind of like gave David a heads up about like, hey, like that they're kind of throwing suspicion your way, so you might want to be even more adept at not being an issue or whatever. But that whole sequence was so interesting, especially because there's that last chunk of the sequence where I thought, like, there's probably, like, hidden camera cuts in it. Once again, I'm not this cinematography person, but after a little while, I was like, this seems like it's just a one, like, not tracking shot, but it's just, like, it all seemed like one take or something. It was probably one of those takes where it's, like, it looks like one take, but it's cleverly, like, I mean, obviously, it's, like, camera panning and stuff like that, but it just, the camera work stayed consistent, like, from like Ingu being behind the truck, popping off a few shots, getting into the other truck, and then like backing up. I was like, that whole sequence played out like that. I was like, oh man, that must have taken a lot to coordinate that scene, especially with all like the gunfire, some of those people getting shot and stuff like that. Because the whole thing popped off because Lee contacted like their nearby like heavily armed people, and you know things kind of escalated. So there were like shots fired. I think people killed on both sides, or at the very least, there's people killed and there were people injured. So the whole deal went super sideways, and obviously everyone kind of came back with their heads held low, and Ingu is the most pissed off because it's like, right, things weren't supposed to go that way. This was supposed to kind of be open and shut, but it's like, okay, didn't go the way we want to, but Troy's saying that this at the very least puts us in a very nice position, because at the very least you've cut off his route through Brazil. Like, now we're kind of closing off that route to him because he can't do it now because the Brazilian government's going to be on like high alert, so that route is completely closed. So we screwed him over in that regard. Plus they ended up freezing a lot of his accounts as well, but that just, the timing just hits Gion too, and he's like, no, like they just happened to know where we were going and they happened to freeze our accounts, because it's like was it Europol? I don't know if that was like a mistranslation, or it's like, was that supposed to be like Interpol, but it said Europol, so like, I don't know if I guess maybe those are two separate things, or maybe that's another name for Interpol. I don't know. Either way, it's like they got involved and like froze our accounts. So now it's a thing of like, well, who amongst us could have done it? And you kind of feel bad the way he kind of treats Byun, but it's also because I think no matter what Byun does, he will always be seen as a guy that's like, oh, you will always never be like, you know, you're like, it's that whole conversation about like, oh, like, do business with your own, like, Koreans should do business with Koreans, because he's like grabbed onto Byun and was like smacking him in the face and being like, the fact is, are you still a gangster? Like, the fact is, you still act like you are back when you were working with Chen. Like, have you not grown? Have you not changed? Has Satan gotten the best of you? Is kind of what Gion is kind of on about, because he's trying to look at everyone and trying to see like who could have been responsible for this. Was it David? Was it Lee? Was it Byun? Because they were his most inner circle, and obviously trying to turn it back on Ingu, being like, right, you knew about the route and stuff like that too. And it's like, well, kind of managing to talk his way out of it, because he's kind of handling a lot on his own, because he kind of made it clear to Choi that he's like, how am I supposed to trust the NIS? Like, you said if I got in trouble, I could go running to the U.S. embassy. It's like, well, can't really do that in the middle of a jungle, can I? So And where was your guy having my back? It's like, well, he was probably trying to keep his cover while also avoiding getting killed themselves because they were in just as much danger as Ingu was. So now it's a situation of, well, what are they going to do now? Because they are on a tight timetable because, well, it's like, not only did they lose a lot of the drugs, they got some of like I think they lost all the money, I think, but they were able to get some of the drugs back, especially because of Ingu. But it's like, yeah, they still owe the Colombians a lot of money, and even later on, Gion saying like they're pestering him about it. So it's like it's an escalated timetable. Like they need to expand the empire just for their own needs, but also it's like, right, we need to get enough capital back to pay the Colombians off and stuff like that. Especially when Gion introduced so much to Ingu this episode. The fact is, getting him to meet with President Delanio, and that interesting relationship where he's like, man, that guy moves so sluggish now. Back in his younger days, like, I'd pay him a certain amount, he'd move quickly. Now he's just trudging along, and you can almost get that, not almost, he makes it pretty clear, Gion's go, I wonder, would he try and, like, kill Delanio, or would he try and get someone to, like, to replace him? I mean, it's like, well, the guy, like, staged a coup and got in that position, but I think it's a situation of he's not moving the way you want him to. He's not moving as quickly. He's dragging his feet. The fact is, like, petty bribes is all he's kind of... It's like, oh, you're not seeing the bigger picture here. You're focused on, like, the little bit of cash you're going to be getting here and there. It's like, oh, yeah, in God we trust, and, and in friendship we trust and stuff like that. Like, he's just worried about lining his pockets on such a small scale, not even worry about, like, the bigger picture, which is what Gion's kind of more so focused about. So I would assume eventually he'd try and either... I don't know if he'd even be able to, like... Well, because they were saying that he wanted to become, like... He's kind of an unofficial president anyway, that he's kind of running. They kind of abandoned that, like... That was something they kind of throw out there, like... I guess that was just when we still thought maybe potentially could have been a good guy, but that was kind of, like, pretty quickly thrown out too. But I don't know. I don't know if that's something where he's going to try and, like, amass enough power and then replace Delanio as, like, the president, because it's like, right, why have a middleman do all the work when I'm technically doing all the work? So, I'm paying you to do stuff, but you're being sluggish about it. Why don't I just take that position, or at the very least put someone else in that position? So I'm curious to see which route he kind of goes with that. I could definitely see him kind of taking the position himself, especially where they were setting that, bringing that kind of full circle, because they were kind of hinting at, like, oh, he's going to, like, run for the presidency. Kind of didn't really need to when the president's kind of in your pocket, but now it's like, no, I need to make moves on my own, because if I don't, things won't go the way I want them to. So there's that route with things, but he also showed Ingu that he's going to basically cut the Colombians out of the whole picture. Like, once he pays them off, once they get a strong foothold in Korea, once everybody build up enough capital, he plans on controlling everything, the creation, the distribution of the drugs himself. He has, like, a special place that, like, no one can keep eyes on, because basically he had Delanio make it a military zone, so no one's able to kind of peek into this, like, bit of land that and it's not just a bit, it looks quite massive amount of land that's going to be where he ends up making and his distribution center for the cocaine. So, and there's still that part of me that each episode, I'm kind of like, nah, like, I was like, Ingo's definitely not going to side with Gion, especially after everything. But then, like, Gion kind of sweetens the deal by being like, oh, yeah, you get 10% of, like, the gross profits. I want you to be, like, my partner in crime, and I want you to be kind of like my manager with all of this. And it's like, yeah, like, once we get up and running, you'll easily be making, like, 1 billion won a year. So it's like, and it's like, yeah, think about, like, the kind of car you could get your wife to drive, or, like, the kind of school you could get your kids into. Like, that sounds pretty damn enticing. Obviously, he doesn't know that his phone has been tapped by the NIS, so, like, they're hearing all of this. And even one of Choi's subordinate was kind of like, yeah, I don't think we have to worry about Ingu, but he's like, shouldn't we have a plan B? And it's just like, yeah, this is their Hail Mary, so, it's all kind of relies on this plan, so they're still trying to keep going. But even later on, Ingu's like, should we really be doing this? Like, shouldn't we be kind of taking it slow? But for Choi, it's like, no, let's try to make this go through because this is our best way and opportunity to take down Jion. But, Ingu's kind of like, shouldn't we take it slow? And I'm sure from Choi's perspective, it's just because of the conversation they overheard with Jion and Ingu that makes Choi go like, okay, like, you're just biding time because you're trying to benefit from the situation. You're just trying to test the water to see in the long run, is it better just to work with Jion? It's like, it's that complicated thing of, yes, he wants to support his family, and I think he's kind of being enticed by that. It's like, right, the debt and complicated situation, he started, once again, road to hell, good intentions, right? So you kind of lose yourself along the way. And I'd worried about that early on. I'm like, well, is that potentially going to be something that happens? But every so often, he'll just kind of make me go like, no, I'm being stupid. Like, he seems like on the path to be like, no, I'm taking Jion down after everything he did, killing like Young-soo. So I'm not going to stray, but then other stuff does make me go like, it seems like he might be tempted, but it's probably just him playing the role of like, oh yeah, like I genuinely thank you for like, your offer and stuff like that. It's just this interesting situation where like Ingu and both Choi, it's like, right, they're kind of relying on each other, but at the same time, it's like, both of them kind of has wavering trust in the other, so it kind of complicates that dynamic between Ingu and the NIS. Because later on, Choi meets with the DEA, and they're telling him like, cool. Basically, the NIS is going to have to handle the entire budgetary operations for all of this, and the DEA will get involved, but unofficially. There won't be any official record about it, and you're going to have to use mercenaries. So I'm like, that seems super shady to do that, but I'm like, but I guess it's like, maybe that's the US's way to kind of prevent themselves from having any of this blowback in their face. They want like Korea to take, like NIS in particular, to kind of take all, like, this is kind of your operation, kind of like, yeah, if it works, cool, it'll work in our favor, but if it doesn't, we want you to basically suffer all the ramifications of things gonna go in sideways. Because Choi's trying to convince him that taking out Jion from the picture will kind of help with the Cali cartel, which they're kind of looking, the Cali cartel, like kind of the two agents like smile at each other because they're like, I think they're like, oh, you think you're, I don't know whether they don't see Jion as like the threat that he is, and they're like, oh, you're talking about the Cali cartel, like, oh, like this guy has anything on them, like, oh, he's, Jion is big enough game, but I don't know if they necessarily treat him like he does. I mean, the DEA at the very least, obviously the NIS does. But. So finally it comes down to like, all right, let's make this deal through, obviously saying like, hey, Choi presents himself as like, I found another route, but we're going to have to go through Puerto Rico. But then like David kind of looked into it and was like, yo, the Puerto Rico, and it's like, at first I was kind of like, well, Puerto Rico isn't like it isn't a U.S. territory, because I think they were misunderstanding it and treating it like, oh, like Puerto Rico is kind of a U.S. territory, kind of like Alaska and Hawaii are, like they are like people, I think he was kind of treating it like that. I think it kind of plays into there's always been talks about that, like making like Puerto Rico like the 51st state or something like that. Like I remember years ago that being a conversation. I don't even know if those conversations still ever pop up, but it was kind of in that vein, so I can understand that misconception, because it feels like probably even around, probably like well after this fact, after the time period that this is in, because like I said, this is like 2008, 2009 when the show is taking place, so I don't know if those are still conversations that still end up coming up from time to time. And Choi having to pivot really quickly. It's like, oh, you're all about baseball, right? You went into the baseball World Series and stuff. It's like, well, Puerto Rico and the U.S. were playing against each other. If they were like, if Puerto Rico was one of the states of the U.S., then why would they be two separate? Like, why would it be playing against each other? So it's like, right, they're close allies, but Puerto Rico isn't directly connected to the U.S., but it is a place that has, I guess, U.S. extradition at the very least. They have enough ties that probably Puerto Rico could probably nudge Gion towards the U.S. and it'd be enough, but it's like not an official U.S. like territory, or even just, state. So, but John isn't kind of taking the bait because it's like, right, we'll find another route. And so Troy kind of leans into it being like, what are you talking about? Came begging me for a route. And the fact that you want me to come up with another route, we needed to kind of do this really quickly, right? He's like, yeah, but we can take our time now. I was like, well, you're going to give me more time? Like, what am I kind of like your errand boy that I get, it's like, so I part of me wonders, is it just because like, yeah, there's so many official, like, I'm sure like, because the people who leave at the end of that scene must be like some of the higher ups from NIS, so it's like, okay, like his bosses are probably there and he has to look good in front of them, so like Troy's probably pushing this even more because we need to make this happen, because if we don't, this is going to blow up in our faces. He's the one that kind of really pushed the whole angle of we need to kind of make this go down quick, but like Ingu's the one that kept being like, no, we need to go slow about this, so. But yeah, to the point that Gion doesn't like Troy's tone and just kind of hangs up on him. He's like, oh, you want to walk away from the deal? Fine, walk away from the deal. But once again, they're in a very compromised position because they still have because even with their normal channels, they're able to move some of it. But I think they said like there's still like 1.9 tons of like the coke they still haven't been able to move, and they can't really go through other channels just because of everything going on right now, so they're limited in what they can do. Because of that, it would take them a full year to make money off that coke rather than being able to kind of like deal with it pretty quickly. So Gion is trying to find another route, which he kind of does later. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it. Ingu follows him, and it turns out that his other route, he says like, oh, it's something dirty, and he ends up going to Chinatown. So it's like, right, working with Chin, I guess like his connections, like if you kind of like put everything through their connections, it'll probably like, I don't, maybe like using his connections and routes to kind of put the drugs out there. Maybe maybe use him as a bit of a scapegoat. Like, yeah, let him kind of be the in-between. Like, you do try the U.S. route, but you try to go it at your own terms, and using Chen as a scapegoat to take the fall in case anything goes wrong. Or maybe at the very least, like, probably just find a different route entirely into Korea. Because the whole point was to go through, like, Puerto Rico to U.S. through Puerto Rico to get to Korea was kind of the whole point. But now they'll find, maybe, I guess, go through China now because of Chen. Maybe that's kind of like the implication there. We'll have to wait to see where the next episode goes. But it's like, right, they don't like each other. Fact is, especially because Chen last episode was literally like, okay, you go ahead and kill Gion, but it seems like, well, that seems super unlikely now, considering like you're going to be working together, but they don't like each other, and they could easily stab each other in the back, and it's ready to stab each other in the back, and it's ready for the other one to stab them in the back. So they definitely got their eyes on each other. We'll see how well this works out. But when they were talking, Ingu and Choi, Ingu ended up running into a little girl. She's the child of someone who's a part of the cult. Like, her dad's overseas, and her mom, all she does is pray all day. And it's like, right, because she was like, oh, do you believe in like the church, like God? He's like, I'm only doing business here. I don't really believe in God and stuff. And the little girl is kind of wanting out of this place just because of how terrible it is. And then she kind of gets dragged away. And the moments like that, especially with what he saw last episode with the kids being drugged, as a father himself, like, it disgusts him. So for him, it's like, right, wouldn't it just be easier to kill Gion? And for Choi, it's like that, but that's kind of not how they roll. It's like, this has been Operation 3 years in the making. We just wanted to be a success. But it's like, yeah, it probably would be easier. Because they can't officially sanction any assassinations. The NIS can't, but it's like unofficially. He's like, Ingu's like, I don't even have to be the one to do it. So I don't know if he was going to convince Chen to do it, if that was what it was going to be, or try and turn some of Gion's people against him or something. I don't know. But I feel like now that him and Chen are working together, killing Gion kind of becomes a moot point at this point. But maybe you could still maneuver and play the whole situation to still working for. I don't know. We'll have to really wait till the next episode to fully see what the ripple is, these two working together, what that situation looks like, what deals are made. Once again, especially considering Shin was like, yeah, kill the bastard because you promised you would, and what that means for their agreements now. So we'll have to wait and see what the next. Well, by that I mean like that agreement between Ingu and Chen. Like, does that mean like, I guess Chen will leave Ingu alone for now, but he won't like cooperate with anything about killing Gion. But I guess you could still be like, hey, the fact is we do this right. Every bit of Gion's business will go to you, so killing him is the best option because you walk away the winner. Maybe that's the thought process. Either way, it's going to be interesting to see how this all ends up playing out next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.